Ah,
So,
the big red chair.
The big red, finally.
Pretty good.
Finally, you don't have to run for president now. I will get to that in a second. So I want to first talk about the legislation that you've proposed. You've done a lot of tech-related legislation. You've done a lot of others around pharmaceuticals and things like that. I'd love you to sort of give an overview, because the CHIPS Act passed, the CHIPS and Science Act passed, the Inflation Reduction passed, a lot did pass recently, and there's a lot of momentum on that, in bipartisanship. But the American Innovation and Choice Online Act with Senator Grassley, which you've co-sponsored, and there's a lot of other co-sponsors, it targets tech companies with valuations of more than, is it $550 billion, including Amazon, apparently not Meta right now, Alphabet, Apple, and prevents them from pushing rivals to boost products and services. Passed the Senate Judiciary Committee in January, consideration by the full Senate supposedly. What's going on?
Okay, just step one back, because following Scott and his reluctant optimism, I'd say I'm a resolute optimist in that I am really proud of all the work we've done that you just mentioned, and at getting at so many of his charts and so many of the challenges we struggle with. The fact that we passed a bill when anyone had counted us out for a 40% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2030 was a big deal. The fact that, and I just talked to Mark about this, that we're finally moving on Medicare negotiation to bring down the prices of pharmaceuticals, that we are going to start investing in chips manufacturing, as you point out, in America when we're down to 12%. The burn pits for our veterans, Sweden and Finland into NATO, you name it. We have really been moving and pushing hard. And the reason it's relevant, having just talked to Senator Schumer this morning, to what we're talking about here is never count us out when the cause is right and it's something that we need to tackle. In this case, this bill is something that is important for capitalism. I'm a huge believer in capitalism. That's actually what brought me to this area. I was in private sector for 14 years, something that maybe not everyone knows. One of my big clients was MCI when they were fighting to get into the long distance market. So I have a healthy respect for the work that these incredible, innovative companies have done. And I'm not a Neanderthal, as you know about it. At the same time,
we'll get to the ads about how you are, in fact, a Neanderthal, but go ahead.
So I won't defend myself here at this moment. But when you have gatekeeper companies where Google has a 90% monopoly on search, when Amazon is starting to more and more make their own stuff, sell their own stuff, and put it at the top of their search engine, when Facebook has 3 billion users, when Apple and Google basically have a duopoly on app stores with the Apple phones, Apple controls the apps, and the non-Apple phones, Google controls the apps. That's what we're dealing with. So when that happens, you need some kind of rules in place so that you don't have the gatekeepers also controlling who wins in the marketplace. And so that's what this is about.
All right, but it begs the question, why has this not passed? And let me just read you something. Someone was talking about one of the issues is content moderation. There's a lot of parts of this thing. And the flexibility of tech platforms to guard against misinformation and hate speech that have stalled its progress. Would you say that's what stalled the progress?
No, not at all.
All right, well, let me go into that. Someone said that the Republicans and Democrats who seemingly were bipartisan, the Republicans are very concerned about criminalizing some of not posting, which is happening in Texas, and the Democrats want to make sure there's stringent content moderation. Would you say that's the issue?
No, it's an issue that's been raised to try to derail the bill, but it is not the issue. Because I know, talking to Ken Buck and David Cicilline over in the House, talking to Senator Grassley, we'll be able to work these things out. We may add some language to clarify some things. That happens with any piece of legislation. But what this bill is about at its core is a competition bill, that you can't self-preference all your own stuff, that you can't copy, as Amazon did with the 4-person luggage carrier, luggage organizer company in Brooklyn. You can't just copy non-public data and use it from people that are trying to advertise on your site. Part of the reason the National Federation of Independent Businesses just strongly endorsed our bill. And you can't require people to buy a bunch of stuff to put yourself at the top of the platform. One of the ironies of all of this actually is that Amazon just offered in Europe to, it's been reported, to settle an antitrust suit half of our bill. They offered to basically make sure that they weren't using the third-party seller information in how they make decisions about Amazon Basics, and that they wouldn't require you to buy distribution services in order to be part of and qualify for Amazon Prime.
Right.
So I bring that up because what has slowed us down is this incredible onslaught of money, and that's what happens with monopolies. That's what happened throughout history. AT&T, eventually our country got its act together, took it on. One of the former chairs said it made it a stronger company.
All right, so
Standard
so
Oil.
you don't think these issues around content moderation?
I think we can fix those. And as I said, the bill is very clear. It's a competition bill.
Okay.
We have a safe harbor for security, privacy, those kinds of things. And I just don't believe that's really the reason. I think the reason is that it is really hard to take on these subjects, as you know. It is really hard to do it when you have the biggest companies the world has ever known that control an inordinate part of the economy opposed to it. And yet, we persevere. I mean, we just added Jack Reed, the head of the Armed Services Committee, as a co-sponsor. And the senators behind closed doors are saying other things than they might be saying in the rooms with the companies.
With the companies. All right. So one of the things is the idea is that tech is a bipartisan issue. Controlling tech is a bipartisan issue. Who has been an obstacle to you from your perspective?
Well, again, there haven't been many people that have come out against the bill, which I think is significant, and that is in part because a number of polls have showed that the public does want us to put some guardrails in place, not to destroy these companies, not to get rid of their products, but to put some guardrails in place. And so that's why I think you're seeing that happening, where you don't have many people, where the vote in the Judiciary Committee was 16-6. Right. And so I haven't really encountered that as much as the problem I keep dwelling on. When the members have all this money running ads, the companies know this against them, when there's pop-up ads coming up all the time containing lies that the bill would get rid of Amazon Prime, or my favorite one, Amy Klobuchar in a small letter could break Google Maps. Thank you, lawyer, whoever put the could, that no one can read. The senators are talking about it. They're talking about the ads that are running that are different in each state because they're trying to manipulate people, and they're well aware.
There was one aimed at Tom Cotton, which was a military mother of the year who said leftists are starting to hurt the internet. There was
clearly they wouldn't have been playing in Rhode Island.
Right, absolutely. There's one, there's $95 million pushed up against this. So one is called Leave My Phone Alone, with a very strange guy with a tarp. I'm not sure what he has under it. I feel like he's headed to the Capitol for some action. Buildings exploding in the Ukraine, hackers in hoodies, Chinese soldiers. And your name, Don't Break What Works, message, Amy Klobuchar hates progress.
Okay. That's a lot, as my daughter would say. I think it would be amusing if the ads ran in the blue states that are in the red states. Yeah. We continue to build support for the bill. And I'll say what they're saying in the red states is this is a liberal bill. What they're saying in the blue states is, uh-oh, this is for the conservatives. What they're saying in the kind of in-between purple states, say like Maine, this would mean that Chuck Schumer will control the world. So they're running different ads, and the problem they've got is there's 100 senators, and they're all talking, and they all know exactly what's going on. And so I would suggest to them, as I had many times, that they would be much better off, as they appear to be doing in Europe, with offering ideas that are concrete, that aren't just bullshit studies, that actually could move us along to put in some smart guardrails in place, because I don't think this is sustainable when you have what's been going on. As you're seeing, the Amazon's rates are going up and up and up from where they were 2014 to 2021 for the small businesses, where you've seen the consumer rates going on, yet more and more people are dependent on them. You've got to be able to have a fair shake for those that advertise on these platforms.
It is still a matter of time, because the next election is coming in November. Kevin McCarthy, I know, has met with the tech people who have been offering him all kinds of, Turkish delights, I don't know, whatever they're offering him, to be not to push this. They have said they're not going to push this. What's your timing? Why hasn't Senator Schumer has reportedly, and you may think this is correct, said that they don't have the votes yet. Why hasn't it come to a vote? And by the way, there's a lot to do in the 2 weeks or 3 weeks. Is it 3 weeks or 2 weeks?
Well, we'll see how many weeks it is. But part of this is everything that's been happening. As you know, I'm not going to give a lecture about the filibuster, as one of my staff members once said, who I adored in the state office a few years ago. I said, oh, remind me to call so-and-so about the filibuster. And I came back, there was a Post-it note, call Mr. Phil E. Buster,
Okay,
which became a joke between us for quite a while.
Yeah.
But it takes weeks to do each bill. Even the burn pit bill that was bipartisan, the semiconductor science bill that was bipartisan, there's always someone wanting to hold it up, one person that can hold things up. That is the reason things take a long time in the US Senate. And you have seen us plow through, basically, in a really good way, all these important things. So I wouldn't count us out for a minute, just because I know where people are in this bill. And I also know where the public is. And I know whether it's that, whether it is allowing our news organizations to be able to get fair rates for their content. What was it the Washington Post said? For their logo, democracy dies in darkness. That's where we're headed on the local level if we don't take action on content. We also have privacy legislation, which I know you're talking about.
Yes.
There are many things. The 2 kids bills that are advancing that Frances Haugen was so pivotal to in terms of protecting kids from bad content.
So, again,
all of those things are out there and moving. And if you look at glass half full, this bill I did on competition is the first one since the beginning of the internet to even advance to the Senate floor.
Right, absolutely.
So I view it as progress.
It is the only bill that's advanced. I know you, but logistically, how are you going to shove it? I believe you're very persistent. What is...
If I said it here, then I'd have the biggest companies in the world hearing my plan.
Okay, but
Probably not a good idea.
Do you go talk to them, or what do you, does it have to be an all-out?
We continue to talk to them. We have made so many changes to the bills that have been in response to concerns that they have raised. At some point, we know that, for instance, just one example, the news organization bill, you know, when they claim that that is somehow going to break the internet, well, they've been doing it in the land down under, and it hasn't brought the internet under, basically, in Australia. So we know that we have examples in other countries where some of this stuff is going on, and as time goes on, that's going to become increasingly clear. So we continue to talk to them, but the truth is you can't wait and be basically, you're becoming a patsy if you just sit there and wait for them to decide they suddenly like this bill, because they don't want to see any bills passed, unfortunately, except maybe a privacy bill, as long as it works. And I want to make sure it works for the public.
Okay, so one of the things specifically about the competition bill, I was at an event and Susan Wojcicki from YouTube was there and complaining about you to me. And I'm like, she's over there, you should go talk to her. And I sent her over to you. And I think your aide was not happy about that, but I did. I said, go over and yell at her. And 2 of the things that she talked about, this is just specifics, were TikTok, that they are not impacted. Now, Scott just talked about being essentially they're a part of the Chinese government, et cetera, et cetera. It's still, no matter what you say, it's a product people like. Like it's a very innovative and interesting product. How do you meet those ideas that these companies are getting legislated and this other one that's eating their lunch is not?
Well, there could well be legislation on TikTok that's related to security, national security. I'm a big, Mark Warner is on my competition bill. He's one of the co-sponsors. And at the same time, he gets that that's a separate issue of the gatekeepers in our country versus what's been going on with security issues with TikTok. So there may be a totally separate route when it comes to that. But if TikTok reached the gatekeeper status, which is defined by, of course, number of users and the gatekeeper status in the market caps and things like that, then they would also be included. It's not a static fact.
What Scott was pointing out, you may not really know their correct numbers, correct?
Okay, well, that's a good point. But I think that right now we know they're not at that point.
So when you think about, this last question on this bill, what has to happen what are you doing specifically in the next few weeks to make this, I mean, calling Chuck Schumer every hour? What get it on the floor? Like what?
I continue to look for a route for this bill, and I can't tell you the exact day it will come out. I know that we have been now, there's 120 billion Bloomberg identified in ads against the bill, which is more than any other political issue except the Georgia Senate race. Even Bloomberg had said, we bet it's more, could be double, could be, who knows. As you point out, $95 billion in lobbying expenses, more than pharma has spent. It is an incredible amount of money that I'm up against. I have 2 lawyers, they have 2,800 lawyers and lobbyists. So I'm not naive about the David versus Goliath thing, but I believe in our country in the end. That's how we got all this stuff done recently. And I was reminded of it again and again this last week when Senator Portman and I went to Ukraine. You know, those people are putting their lives on the line for democracy. And all we in Congress have to do here is put our votes on the line and make sure we're doing best by our economy and best by our democracy. And to me, that means making sure we have thriving news organizations, and it means making sure that we have got an economy where small businesses come up and can create the next Google or the next Facebook.
So when you think of go ahead, please stop. When you think of the bill that will pass, this is the one, do you feel like this is the Journalism and Competition Act you're talking about, which this is, some people, your critics have said it could encourage some companies to fire people. Linking is a fundamental feature of the open internet. Setting up a scheme where websites are being forced to pay to link is a fundamentally against the nature of the open web. How do you deal with those critics? Obviously, it's working in Australia, but it's working for Rupert Murdoch mostly in Australia.
Okay, so first I'd point out it's not just me, as much as I'm the one willing to be here and sit in the red chair.
Right.
This is a bill that I have with Senator Kennedy of Louisiana, and the co-sponsors include Senator Durbin, the chair of the Judiciary Committee, include Senator Thune, number 2 in the Republican caucus, includes Lindsey Graham and Cory Booker, you name it. So I think it's really important for people to realize in both of these bills, as well as helping to fund the agencies, there is massive support across the aisle. The second thing is, what this bill does is simply allows news organizations that have less than 1,500 employees, whether they be radio, TV, or newspaper, to band together to negotiate rates. A little newspaper in Worthington, Minnesota, bet you haven't heard of the Worthington Globe, they can't exactly take on what those content rates are. Yet, we all want to have for towns, 1,000 person towns, 3,000, some kind of coverage of their city councils, coverage of what's going on with a business that's opening or closing, coverage of their high school football games, coverage of if a flood is coming their way and what the crop prices are. And this isn't happening in the big national basis. And I, as the daughter of a former newspaper man, am a big believer in the First Amendment. And that's what motivates me here.
So they should be paid by these laws.
They should be paid, and the way you allow them to get paid, if we didn't have monopolies, this probably wouldn't be a problem, Kara. But we do. And so I'm trying to exist in that world right now until that gets settled out in the legal realm. But right now, we have to allow these news organizations to get better rates for content. And that means by allowing them to band together, and it's over an 8-year period, so they can go into Facebook and Google mainly and negotiate better rates.
Okay.
That's what the bill is about.
So one of the things that we've talked about before is this, and you wrote a whole book on antitrust. Is it difficult for social media to be competitive without being balkanized when you have, or being large? Because there's a balance between platform security, privacy, and market dominance. Is it possible to create this much innovation in a space that naturally tends towards a network?
Okay, so I think first of all, they have been incredibly innovative. We all know that. I'm wearing a Fitbit right now, okay? But how capitalism has tended to work, and I think it was Adam Smith, the godfather of capitalism, that said, beware of the standing armies of monopolies, while he was a big believer in the invisible hand, is that we always rejuvenate capitalism by making sure monopolies don't get totally out of hand. So there's always this balance. There's a balance of great products that have come up and letting those companies continue to flourish, but also making sure that there is a competitive avenue for new competitors to get into the marketplace. I am a believer in regulation. I was listening to Scott, yes. That's why I want to see a privacy bill, those things. But I'm actually maybe a bigger believer in capitalism than some of the people that oppose this bill, because I see that as part of our solution. And if you shut everyone down by buying everyone up, for instance, then you're never going to know what bells and whistles on privacy maybe Instagram or WhatsApp could have developed. We're never going to know. Thank you, one person. We are never going to know because, in the words of Mark Zuckerberg in the email he sent that was discovered in the House hearings, I'd rather buy than compete. And so, because I believe in that capitalism, I think you always have to balance what is now and what will be in the future. You have to balance when you write rules and regulations that you're not limiting innovation, that you're fostering it. And you have to balance, especially in this realm where we have not done one effing thing since the beginning of the internet, we have to balance protecting security and privacy and then protecting innovation and competition. And I think we have struck that balance. There's a lot more aggressive bills out there. Europe, as you know, is being much more aggressive in how they construct their penalties for violation and the like. We're using a uniquely American regulatory structure where here's our rules, you go out and see if you make them, and if you don't, we're going to have the Justice Department, FTC will come in and do something.
Speaking about Europe, one of the things Margaret Vestager said, I think here last year, is that Americans have traded convenience for control. They just put these laws in place. They passed two very large ones, very similar to yours. Similar, not the same.
Not the same.
Not the same. How do you, if the House turns in the fall, like most people think, in November.
Oh, I don't concede that.
Okay, all right, I won't. That's my last questions to you. But if it does that mean it's dead for a while, or what? If it doesn't pass before?
I know there's actually a lot of Republican support in the House of taking this on. Ken Buck has been
from Colorado.
Incredibly strong on this, and there's others that have. So I wouldn't count anything out, but I'm certainly not going to concede, given what has been going on around the country, given the choice issue and how it's the Democratic Party that's been on the side of the freedom of women to be able to make their own decisions about their health care instead of having Ted Cruz sitting in the waiting room. Given what
that's an image.
Well,
actually,
it's a true
on the
one.
internet,
it's allowing
on the internet,
to make decisions.
On the internet, someone asked, "What is your trick for not vomiting in Ted Cruz's presence?" Was one of them.
Just keep doing my job. He and I've had a uncanny ability to follow him in the Judiciary Committee, where he'll make some point, and then I can't even count the number of times I've said, now I have to throw away my remarks and respond to Senator Cruz.
Yes.
So in any case, our focus on that freedom and the reproductive freedom issue has been, for a change, we don't have the situation where Democrats, what they always say, have a bumper sticker that ends with "to be continued," to be continued. We actually have been very clear in our focus. And what has happened as a result of that? We won a very difficult swing district by a sizable amount in New York State. We won in Alaska and beat Sarah Palin. And we won a referendum vote in the state of Kansas, where more people turned out, women and the men who support them, more people turned out to support reproductive rights than turned out in the entire midterm in Kansas. And there's an old book which you're aware of called What's the Matter with Kansas? My answer now is nothing. Nothing's the matter with Kansas. So those kinds of issues, as well as the fact that we actually have been able to get some stuff done and show people that we have their backs, both bipartisan and
so you're not conceding though either?
I'm not conceding that, no.
Most people think the Senate might in fact be more Democratic.
No, the Senate I'm not going to go into but the Pennsylvania race where we've got, Dr. Oz. I will say that most voters, including in Pennsylvania, don't want candidates that are out of touch or out of state. He has the virtue of being both. Where Fetterman is doing so well. We have got our incredible Reverend Warnock winning in Georgia. We're doing so well in Arizona with Mark Kelly, whose resume just screams patriotism. Maggie Hassan is doing well in New Hampshire. And then you add Catherine Cortez Masto, not too far away in Nevada. Then you add in what's happening in Wisconsin. I was just with Judge Beasley in North Carolina. running against Congressman Budd, who tech people voted against the CHIPS bill, as well as the infrastructure bill. And her slogan is, "This Bud's not for you." Okay. So, and then Val Demings and Ryan in Ohio,
so
we're in good shape. But I want to just talk about Ukraine for one.
Okay, all right, I will. I promise I'll get to Ukraine. Okay, good. But I'm going to go. It's in a lightning round.
It's a good tech story, by the way.
Okay.
Okay.
When you're thinking about doing this, being pugnacious, Biden's shift in tone, whether it's the White House social media site, the speech he just gave. Right. Is this a new thing and is critically important to do right now? I mean, you've not been a shrinking violet, obviously. Mm-hmm. What do you think is happening?
To take on democracy?
Yes.
Yeah, it's always a good time to defend democracy. Mm-hmm. And what's been going on when you have people like Liz Cheney out front, taking on her party, putting her, obviously, her own political career in peril, now losing the primary because she's willing to stand up for democracy. There are a whole lot of people that are doing that right now. They're doing it, brave men and women of the FBI, who just doing their job. When you've got documents that were squirreled away in Mar-a-Lago next to where they rent out the croquet sets and the badminton rackets, when they literally could reveal the intelligence that identifies the patriots around the country that are protecting our country from those that would do us harm. You have got people, Republicans for the most part, witnesses that came forward and told the truth in those committees. And I was along with Roy Blunt, was in charge that day of the Electoral College and then later the inauguration. And we were the ones at 3:30 in the morning with Vice President Pence, who stayed to do his job till the end, who walked through that broken glass with the spray-painted pillars on either side, a walk we had taken that morning, which was a celebration, and there we were, just the three of us, with 3 pairs of young pages holding those mahogany boxes containing the last of the ballots, and we went in and said, democracy rules. Not a mad mob of insurrectionists. When you go through an experience like that, and you think people are trying to continue it on under the direction of Donald Trump, yeah, Joe Biden's doing the right thing by defending our democracy.
And do you feel like bipartisanship is possible in an age of MAGA?
Of course I do. I wouldn't do what I do. So much of my work, I was just thinking, I talked to 5 Republican senators in the last 2 days, one about tech, the rest about other things, because that's how I have always gotten things done, and I've always looked for that common ground. I believe that courage is not standing by yourself, giving a speech that no one listens to. Courage is whether or not you're willing to stand next to someone you don't always agree with for the future of this country, and so that's what's going on right now. Ukraine. So Rob Portman and I went there last week. It is, as you can imagine, because we're in a war zone security, it is something to go there. And we met with President Zelensky for an hour and a half, and he asked me to tell every audience I spoke to, whether it was the Labor Day picnic up in the Iron Range in Minnesota yesterday or here, to thank our country for what we have done. The American Embassy told me that they got some takeout food recently from a Ukrainian restaurant in Kyiv, and someone, actually a total stranger, wrote, "Thank you for the HIMARS." We have kept their people fed. We have kept their economy going, even though it's really difficult. And we, along with 42 nations, from Japan to South Korea to Poland, have given them what they need to fight this war when everyone had counted them out. When you are there and you see the bravery of these people, you just come back with a whole different perspective. As I listened to Scott, I was glad he ended with the silver lining, because you see people that are willing to give it all. Ballerinas putting on camo and going to the front line. People who are exhausted working in that nuclear plant, trying to protect not just Ukraine, but Europe from a major nuclear disaster, while they are surrounded by 500 Russian troops. Violinists playing these melodies on broken down steps of burnt out apartment buildings to remind people that culture and love still exists in that country. The vibrant blue and yellow. President Zelensky standing there that first day with that video that went viral saying simply, "We are here." And the reason that matters to all of you that are here and watching is Russia with their inhuman barbarism of Vladimir Putin, has always poked us on technology, whether it's hacking into voter files or going after us in election. This time, because of technology and Ukraine's willingness to use it and the assistance of the countries around the world, primarily including incredible work on this end, it is a major reason that we are still there, in the words of Zelensky, that democracy is still thriving in Ukraine. So I just want to thank everyone who has worked on it. But it is
We're
a
going to
big
get,
deal.
please line up for questions. We only have a few
Okay,
minutes.
yeah.
But one question I have to ask, are you running for president again?
No, Joe Biden is running for
I
president.
mean later.
I've been very clear that I'm supporting President
I got
Biden.
that, later.
Okay.
2028.
There's people who want to ask questions.
Okay. That's a yes.
No,
Question.
I actually think, don't count President Biden out right now with everything he's gotten
I
done.
won't.
All right, good. Oh, I can see some people are smiling in the audience. This makes me happy. All right.
Hey,
Hi.
I'm Don. I run a couple of photo sharing companies, SmugMug and Flickr.
Heard of them?
And I loved how you talked about the legislation sort of trying to find the right sweet spot between current and future innovation.
Yeah.
But I'm curious about past innovation and how, if there's any effort or thought that you have around rectifying some of the things that some of those companies have done already that have damaged innovation. So the example that I'm most familiar with is Google Photos. They came out with it maybe 5 years ago or so, and they promised everybody that it was going to be free, and it put dozens, maybe hundreds of my competitors and their competitors out of business. It was very difficult for me to compete. And then all of a sudden, once they got more than 1 billion people's photos, they changed the name of the game. They had lost hundreds of millions of
Don, I'm
dollars.
sorry.
Okay, I get it.
Sure.
I am.
They changed the game. It's no longer free. They're charging 1 billion people. They use their outsized market power to compete unfairly. How do we handle not only what protects?
What came before?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for being an entrepreneur willing to speak out. Reminding me of once when I was on the Stephen Colbert show to talk about the antitrust book. We went through this whole thing and acknowledging how hard it is to speak out. Colbert looks at the camera live in the middle of it and says, by the way, I just want to say one thing. Google, I love you. The point there is it's not easy to be the one speaking out. And my answer to you is there is, as you know, major investigations going on out of the Department of Justice. There's a major FTC one on Facebook that was started during actually the Trump administration, as well as the Google one under Delrahim, the head of antitrust there. So there is investigations going on what's gone on before. And there are also, as you know, a lot of interest in what's going on in the ad space on the Google front. I have other bills that we haven't talked about today because we would go into nerd land, as much as Kara loves to do that, when it comes to mergers and making it easier to look back. That's always, again, as I just talked about, a thin line that you want to make sure that you're preserving the way our economy works. But clearly to me, and many people, including Gene Sperling during the Obama administration, have admitted they should have looked more carefully at some of these mergers, but also the use of market power, to be able to basically throw competitors aside. That's why I brought up the Zuckerberg, I'd rather buy than compete line. And that he also said, these may be nascent companies, but one day, and I'm paraphrasing here, so I don't get a Pinocchio. One day, they basically could be competitors that could do us in. And so when that's the attitude, you've got such a problem because you're throwing away so much of our competitive environment. So I don't mean to just throw you over to the winds of the Justice Department, but that's where a lot's going on. I'm doing what I can where I feel like I can get bipartisan support. I would obviously do more things, as keeping that fragile balance, how important it is. But we continue to push on other ideas as well when it comes to this. So thank you for continuing to hang in there with some incredible products.
Thank you.
Hi. So capitalism. A lot of criticisms about capitalism. Some would even consider it to be an anti-democratic force. But you seem to believe really deeply in it. I'm really curious to hear what hope and promise does it hold, in your view, for the future we're trying to build.
Well, I believe in that way to organize ourselves when it comes to the economy. I believe in competitive forces. And I don't believe in basically the model of communism or some kind of a socialist model. I think I was the one presidential candidate, maybe one of two, who when we were asked on one of the debates in New Hampshire, does anyone have a problem with the socialists? As much as I worked with Bernie, including on a bunch of pharma issues, by the way, and we get along well, socialists heading up the ticket. I was the one that raised my hand because of my strong belief in the importance of our America, and that a lot of our America, when you go back to the beginnings, was about people that wanted to be able to compete for ideas. They wanted to be able to have freedom of religion and freedom of speech. And I bristle at anything that's going to hold us back when it comes to that. It is always a balance. It's a balance to protect people's civil rights, something I'm completely devoted to, for voting rights, reproductive rights. We just talked about that. But then also unleashing new ideas. And it's one of the reasons that we're having even a fighting chance in Ukraine right now, because of what we have brought to the table in terms of new ideas. Have I answered your question, or do you have a follow-up?
Let's get to all these
Okay.
others. We got a quick time. Go ahead.
Speaking of,
Okay?
speaking of monopolies and competition, do you believe that a two-party system encourages competition, or is it a democratic form of government?
There we go. I'm not laughing like I'm laughing, because there are days where I wonder that myself, okay? Especially given what we're seeing right now in the Republican Party. I'm a good one to ask this to. Minnesota has always had a strong independent party. We have not many people, and if you don't believe me about that, I have 3 words for you. Governor Jesse Ventura with his feather boa. So I think it's always healthy. I'm close friends of Angus King, who's an independent. It's always healthy to have parties and ideas. I do like the idea for our democracy that in the end people can have a choice, whether it's 2 or 3 or 4. I've seen situations where you'll have like 25 candidates. It's really hard for people to define who they're voting for. And so I am most interested right now, for our sake of our democracy, actually, in uncranking some of these crazy rules that are in place when it comes to the filibuster. When it comes to the Electoral Count Act, something we hope to change by the end of the year. Been working with Senator Collins in Manchin and Zoe Lofgren and others on that to get that done. And making sure that we can have a functioning democracy, which means not suppressing votes and the like. So I don't think that's really small ball, but I'm working in a situation where I think it's realistic. But I've always sought out and proud of support I've had from independent voters in my own state, moderate Republicans and the like. And I think you'll find me as one of the ones that say that no matter what show I'm on, wherever I am. Because when one of the parties go out of whack, which I'm sure some might here think the Democratic Party's a bit out of whack. I personally don't think so. But let's say I think the Republican Party is way out of whack right now. And how do you reform it? A whole bunch of people say, we don't want to be part of this, telling 10-year-olds that get raped that they can't get an abortion and that they have to go to another state. We don't want to be part of that. So we're going to vote for someone else. We're open to voting for your candidates if they don't act this crazy. But we're not going to be part of a party where you have people that literally believe in overturning an election and are commending insurrectionists, and now as former President Trump is doing, talking about pardoning them. To me, you can get competition going if people are willing to move. Then, if they're not happy with what they got over there, they move to the other party. I think that's part of the competition that has worked well in our country for many years.
Okay, can you do one more question?
Yeah.
One more question.
I just want to continue. First thing, thanks for the passion. Obviously, you're passionate, and you're there's a depth that's very clear. But to continue kind of the question around the system, you probably heard what Mark Cuban said about, it's not about the Democrats and the Republicans and this kind of duel and what he was talking about. What about, what are your thoughts around systemic change? I mean, there's got to be a path that goes beyond partisan to systemic.
Yes, I'm really glad you asked that, because there is one thing I forgot to talk about in all of my words today. If we could do something on campaign finance change, and I'm not just being parochial because of my experience right now with having all these ads run against me, to the point of my husband said to my daughter, be nice to your mom today. The 4 biggest companies in the world are against her, and she got banned from Russia. But campaign finance reform, and finally doing something when it comes to a constitutional amendment to reverse Citizens United, I think would be a game changer. Because right now people, whether what kind of thing it is about Supreme Court, about this, about that, people are hiding behind this money. They're not owning their own negative attacks. And it's been horrible for our democracy. And it's something I didn't raise before, but that would be a systemic change, a big deal thing, to be able to try to galvanize the public on getting a constitutional amendment passed. Those kinds of things would lead to systemic change. And I already raised some of the things in the Senate, which sounds so small, but when the future of doing something about climate change, as this heat is record in California today with 115 degrees, and you got forest fires burning all over the place, and it all hinged on, are you going to have about 2 80-year-olds or something be able to stay up for 3 days straight, which is basically what happened, or 2 days straight, because of this crazy thing called Votorama. And I don't mean to pick them, any of the senators, they're not the ones that had strokes. A lot of people, they're literally playing with our climate and our future by not being willing to work on this stuff with us. And so then we're stuck in an archaic Senate rule that's called reconciliation, that got created in the mind of Bob Byrd, and we have to deal with this in order to make decisions about the most important issues that our country has to deal with. That's pretty crazy. That's why we don't have immigration reform, because it doesn't fit into the 51 vote tax and spend rules under Bob Byrd's exemption. That's why we haven't done, in my mind, enough when it comes to climate on rules. Everything has to fit in tax and spend, which isn't necessarily good for the business people around here, in order to be able to get anything done. And so if you want systemic change, you change that stupid filibuster rule so that people own what they did. Even if other party, whatever, we need people to own it, and you do that by having majority vote like we have in every other democracy in the world.
All right. On that note, sorry we can't ask more, but Senator Klobuchar,
okay,
you didn't break the internet, and
I didn't break it even now.
yeah, they don't like me much. You'll be just fine.
Okay, thank you, Kara.
Thank you.
Okay.